The sun rises slowly over the Spanish hills, painting the sky red and gold. The air is thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. On the ridge, British soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, their red coats bright against the gray morning mist. They say nothing. Their hands are steady on their muskets. Below, the ground shakes as thousands of French troops march forward in tight columns, drums pounding like thunder. The shouts of French officers echo through the valley, but still the British wait. A single voice breaks the silence. Fire! In an instant, the quiet ridge explodes with sound and flame. Muskets flash, smoke rolls forward, and the first French line falls. Yet the Redcoats reload, calm and precise. This is how the British infantry fought, steady, disciplined, unbreakable. But what made them so good? Why did they keep winning in the Peninsular War? To answer that, we must go back, before the smoke, before the gunfire, to a time when Europe trembled under a single name. The year is 1808. Across Europe, one name rules all: Napoleon. His armies have crushed one nation after another. France seems unstoppable. But on the far edge of the continent, a new fight begins. In Spain and Portugal, people rise against the French occupation. Britain sees a chance to strike back at the empire that has conquered so much. The British send an army across the sea, led by a calm, determined man named Arthur Wellesley. His mission is clear: help the Spanish and Portuguese drive out the French and push Napoleon's power back across Europe. But it will not be easy. The land is rough, the weather harsh, and the enemy powerful. The French outnumber them, and their generals are some of the best in the world. Still, the British soldiers are professionals, well-trained, proud, and ready for the fight. They march through dusty roads, sleep in the open, and face battle after battle with quiet courage. What happens next will test every man among them, and turn the British infantry into one of the most feared fighting forces in the world. But before they could earn that fear and respect, they had to survive a brutal campaign, one that would push them to the edge of endurance. The British army had entered a land torn apart by war. Spanish villages burned in the distance. Roads were filled with refugees, farmers, women, and children, all fleeing the chaos that Napoleon's armies had left behind. For the soldiers in red coats, this was a new kind of war. They weren't fighting on open fields in neat lines anymore. They were fighting in mountains, valleys, and dusty towns where every stone wall could hide an enemy. The French army was huge, hardened by years of victory across Europe. Their generals were confident, their soldiers experienced, and their tactics fast and aggressive. Wherever they marched, kingdoms fell. By comparison, the British army was small. Professional, yes, but far outnumbered. Every man counted. Supplies were scarce. Food often ran short. The soldiers marched for days in the heat, boots worn thin, clothes dirty from dust and smoke. When they met the enemy, it was often against impossible odds. Cannon fire tore through the ground. Drums thundered. The French advanced in thick columns, shouting their battle cries, but the British did not break. They stood firm. They reloaded and fired again, steady as clockwork. Even when surrounded, they moved together, like one living machine made of courage and discipline. Behind them was a commander who never lost his nerve. Arthur Wellesley watched every move carefully. He used the land to his advantage. Ridges, rivers, and valleys became his allies. He knew his men couldn't afford to waste a single shot or a single step. The challenge was not only to win battles, it was to survive them. To hold the line no matter what came charging from the smoke, and somehow they did. Time and again, the British infantry faced the best soldiers in Europe and sent them back in defeat. But how? What made these men so steady, so effective when others ran or fell? The answer lies in how they trained, how they fought, and how they were led. To understand their secret, we must step into their ranks and hear the snap of their drills, the rhythm of their volleys, and the voice of the men who led them. The British infantry were not the biggest army in Europe, nor the most famous at the time. They didn't have the glory of Napoleon's legions or the size of his forces, but they had something rarer: skill, patience, and discipline that had been built through years of training and hard experience. When British soldiers went to Spain and Portugal, they were already professionals. Most had served for years. They knew how to march for days without food, how to keep formation under fire, and how to fight as one body. Each man trusted the other. That trust became their greatest weapon, but that kind of trust didn't appear overnight. It was built through sweat, repetition, and endless discipline. Training was the heart of the British Army. From the moment a recruit put on the red coat, his life became a routine of drills, commands, and practice. They learned to load and fire their muskets with incredible speed, sometimes 2 or 3 times a minute. They trained until every step, every motion became automatic. When battle came, they didn't need to think. Their hands knew what to do. In the chaos of gunfire and smoke, when others might panic, the British line stayed calm. They fired in volleys, great rolling waves of musket fire that tore through enemy ranks. Officers gave clear, short orders. Men reloaded, aimed, and fired again over and over, as if they were part of a single living machine. This discipline didn't just come from training, it came from pride. These men were professionals, not conscripts. They were part of a small but proud army that valued skill more than numbers. They didn't rely on passion or loud courage. They relied on control, and that control shaped the way they fought. Every movement on the battlefield was measured. Every formation built on discipline. One of the biggest reasons for their success was how they fought, their famous line formation. Most French troops advanced in columns, deep, narrow blocks of men. It looked impressive and was easy to control, but only the front few ranks could fire their muskets. The rest had to wait. The British did it differently. They formed long, thin lines, sometimes only 2 ranks deep, stretching across the battlefield. This meant that nearly every soldier could fire at once. When a French column met a British line, it was like a wall of bullets hitting a single point. The front of the column might fire, but the British line replied with a storm. Within seconds, dozens of French soldiers could fall. The survivors often hesitated, then broke. It was simple mathematics. More muskets firing meant more power. But it wasn't easy. Holding a line under pressure required nerve. Every man had to stand his ground, even as cannonballs rolled through the ranks and musket balls whistled past their heads. Still, the Redcoats stood firm. They didn't chase glory. They held the line, and that steady line became a symbol of British strength across the peninsula. But even the strongest line needs a mind to guide it, someone who can see the whole battlefield while others see only smoke and chaos. Behind that discipline stood a leader who understood exactly how to use it, Arthur Wellesley, later the Duke of Wellington. Wellesley wasn't like Napoleon. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He didn't give fiery speeches or charge at the front. Instead, he watched, planned, and waited. He believed battles were won by preparation, not emotion. He chose his battlefields carefully. He looked for high ground, strong positions, and natural barriers, ridges, rivers, or hills that could protect his men. His favorite tactic was simple but deadly. Make the enemy attack uphill, into British guns. When the French came forward, often in large columns, they would find themselves under heavy fire from British lines waiting above. The French attacks would slow, break, and finally retreat. Wellington's genius was not just in planning, it was in trust. He trusted his infantry completely. He knew they could hold their ground against any attack if given good positions, and they trusted him in return. They called him the chief, and they followed his orders without question. Another secret of their success was endurance. The Peninsular War was not fought in comfort. Soldiers marched through heat, rain, and freezing nights. They crossed rivers without bridges, climbed rocky hills, and fought in towns reduced to rubble. Food was often short. Many soldiers went hungry or survived on rough bread and meat. But they kept marching. They repaired their own boots, carried their own supplies, and learned to survive with very little. This toughness made them stronger than many enemies. While French soldiers sometimes relied on fast-moving supply trains or local resources, the British learned to live off the land when needed. And when the moment came to fight, they were ready, not soft, not tired, but hardened by months of struggle. The British infantry's power came from teamwork. Every man knew his place and role. Officers led from the front, sergeants kept order, and soldiers watched out for one another. When one man fell, another stepped forward. When orders were shouted, everyone moved as one. There was no confusion, no panic. Their confidence came from countless small victories, and not just in battles, but in daily drills and surviving long marches, and in winning the trust of their commanders. Each unit became a family, brothers in arms who had faced danger together. That bond gave them the courage to stand even when death seemed certain. One of the most remarkable things about the British infantry was their calm. Reports from the time often mention how steady they were under fire. French generals were shocked by it. While their own men often shouted, charged, and fought with energy, the British remained silent and precise. They fought like professionals, not amateurs. Even when outnumbered, they didn't rush. They waited for the perfect moment, then fired with deadly accuracy. That patience broke many French attacks before they even reached British lines. To their enemies, it looked like coldness. To historians, it became the mark of discipline. To the men themselves, it was simply survival. They trusted their training, not luck. But survival alone wasn't enough. Every battle brought new challenges, new lessons. And the men and their leaders learned to adapt. As the war went on, the British Army learned and improved. Officers studied enemy tactics. Units shared experience from one battle to the next. Mistakes were noticed and corrected. They learned how to fight alongside Spanish and Portuguese allies, how to use local knowledge, and how to deal with guerrilla warfare. They became not just soldiers but thinkers, adapting to every new challenge. By the end of the war, the British infantry were not just brave fighters. They were one of the most efficient and reliable armies in Europe. Yet behind every formation, every volley, and every victory, there was something deeper, something no training manual could create. There was spirit, the quiet determination that no matter what happened, they would not break. Many soldiers came from poor families, from farms and factories. They had little to their names, but the army gave them pride, a uniform, a purpose, and a chance to prove themselves. They fought for each other more than for glory. Each battle tested them, and each victory reminded them of their strength. By the time the war neared its end, they were more than just soldiers. They were veterans, confident and unshakable. Their victories across Spain and Portugal had not been accidents of war. Every success had a reason, written in their discipline, their training, and the men who led them. And their success in the Peninsular War didn't come from luck or chance. It came from training, discipline, leadership, and the will to endure. They stood firm when others ran. They fought smart when others charged blindly. They won not through numbers but through unity and control. And in doing so, they earned a reputation that would carry them to their greatest victory yet, at Waterloo. But before that final triumph, the Redcoats had already proven themselves, time and time again, on the fields of Spain and Portugal. Each battle tested them, shaped them, and showed the world what made them different. Now, let's look at those moments, the battles where their courage and discipline were truly tested. One of the first great tests came at Busaco in 1810. The French army, confident and bold, marched up a steep ridge where the British waited. The French attacked in massive columns, drums beating, flags high. But as they climbed, the British lines opened fire. Volley after volley cut through the French ranks. Smoke covered the hill, and when it cleared, the French were falling back, leaving the slopes covered with their dead. The line had held. 2 years later came Salamanca, a battle that showed not just discipline but quick thinking. When Wellington saw the French army stretched out and exposed, he struck fast. His infantry moved like a machine, hitting the enemy's weak spot with perfect timing. The French line broke apart and the victory was complete. At Vitoria in 1813, the British, Spanish, and Portuguese armies fought side by side. It was the battle that broke Napoleon's power in Spain. Once again, the British infantry stood firm, firing with deadly precision, pushing the French into retreat. Each battle proved the same truth. When the British infantry stood together, nothing could move them. Their calm, their discipline, and their courage turned the tide of war. By 1814, the long struggle in Spain and Portugal was finally over. The French army, once thought unbeatable, was pushed back across the Pyrenees. The red-coated soldiers who had landed years earlier as strangers in a foreign land now marched home as heroes. The Peninsular War had changed them. It had turned ordinary men into one of the finest fighting forces in the world. Through heat, hunger, and endless marches, they had learned the meaning of endurance. Through battle after battle, they had learned the power of discipline. And through victory, they had earned respect, from their enemies and their allies alike. Arthur Wellesley, their commander, had risen too. The calm, careful general who had led them across Spain would soon face Napoleon himself at Waterloo. But even he knew that his greatest weapon was not cannon or cavalry. It was the steady line of British infantry. Their strength was not just in firepower, but in spirit. They fought not for fame, but for each other. Each man trusted the one beside him, knowing that together they could hold the line against anything. The Peninsular War was more than a series of battles. It was the making of a legend, a story of courage, discipline, and unbreakable resolve. And though the guns have long been silent, the memory of those redcoats still stands, firm, proud, and unshaken, just as they did on the hills of Spain.